Emily Turner vanished without a trace 20 years ago, leaving her family desperate for answers, and the town haunted by a mystery no one could solve, until one midnight confession changed everything. It was a crisp autumn evening in 2005, the kind where the air carries a faint chill and leaves crunch underfoot. Emily Turner, a bright and curious 17-year-old, stepped out of her front door, waving to her mother as she promised to be back in a few minutes. She had planned to take a short walk to her friend's house, just a block away, to drop off a book she had borrowed. Her neighborhood was quiet and familiar, lined with maple trees that blazed in shades of orange and red, and streetlights that flickered on as darkness slowly crept in. For most families, such walks were routine, safe, and uneventful. For Emily, that evening would mark the last time anyone saw her alive. The first hours of her disappearance were filled with frantic searching. Her mother called every friend, retraced her steps down the familiar streets, and even checked the nearby park where Emily liked to read. Police were alerted almost immediately, and officers combed the neighborhood, shining flashlights into dark corners, knocking on doors, and questioning neighbors. A local store clerk recalled seeing a teenage girl matching Emily's description around 6 in the evening, carrying a small backpack, but beyond that, there were no solid leads. Her bicycle, often left near the front porch, remained untouched, and her bedroom, tidy as always, gave no hint of an impending absence. Rumors began to spread quickly through the small town, whispers that unsettled everyone. Some wondered if Emily had simply run away, perhaps upset by school or teenage frustrations. Others feared the darker possibility that someone had taken her. Her father refused to consider that option at first, insisting that Emily was clever, resourceful, and would return when ready. But deep down, he couldn't shake the gnawing sense of dread that began to grow with each passing hour. Days turned into nights, and nights stretched into weeks with no sign, no message, no trace. Flyers were posted, local news covered the story, and volunteers organized search parties, combing the woods and empty lots nearby. Despite the efforts, Emily remained missing. The case began to weigh heavily on the small community. Neighborhood kids who once played together freely now glanced nervously at every shadow. Parents walked their own children to and from school with extra vigilance. Police revisited interviews, hoping someone might remember a detail overlooked in the initial chaos. Yet everything seemed to vanish into the thin autumn air, leaving only questions and fear. Her disappearance became a daily reminder that safety could be fragile, and that evil could linger unnoticed, even in the most ordinary places. Emily Turner's case would come to define an era in the town. A young life vanished without warning, leaving a family desperate for answers. Every detail, every memory, every small clue felt like it could hold the key, but none did. 20 years later, her story would remain etched into the minds of those who remembered that cold autumn night, when a routine walk ended in a haunting silence that would take decades to break. As the years passed, Emily Turner's disappearance became a haunting shadow over the town. Her case, once urgent and filled with hope, gradually slipped into the archives of the police department, labeled as a cold case. For her family, however, the pain never faded. Each day brought memories of her laughter, her curiosity, and the small routines that now felt painfully absent. Her parents clung to the hope that she might still be alive, while friends and neighbors quietly mourned what had been lost. The house where Emily grew up remained the same, a silent testament to a life interrupted, with her room untouched, preserving every book, poster, and photograph like a shrine to the past. Detectives who had worked the case never truly let it go. They revisited old files, scrutinized witness statements, and examined every scrap of evidence, hoping for a lead that might have been overlooked. One piece of evidence, small but significant, had puzzled them from the start: a faint trace of DNA found on the strap of Emily's abandoned backpack. At the time, it yielded no match in any database, leaving investigators frustrated and increasingly desperate. Advances in technology offered occasional bursts of hope, but the trail remained frustratingly cold, a mystery that refused to surrender its secrets. Community life continued, seemingly indifferent to the passage of time. Children grew up, streets changed, and new families moved into the neighborhood. Yet, the memory of Emily lingered, whispered in conversations at school reunions, on local news segments, and in the quiet hearts of those who had known her. The town had learned to live with uncertainty, but the story of her disappearance remained a subtle undercurrent, an invisible thread connecting generations. Every unsolved mystery left behind an imprint, and Emily's was particularly profound. Meanwhile, her family clung to hope in quiet, personal ways. Her mother kept a small notebook, cataloging birthdays, milestones, and anniversaries, as if Emily might return to read them someday. Her father visited the places Emily had loved, parks, libraries, cafes, searching not for her, but for a connection to the life that had been taken from them. These private rituals were acts of survival, tiny rebellions against the cruel, unresolved absence of a daughter, a sister, a friend. As 2 decades passed, the case took on a new character in the eyes of investigators. It became a symbol of persistence, of the belief that time alone could not erase truth. Each development in forensic science renewed the faint hope that what was lost could be found. The single piece of DNA, still preserved carefully in evidence storage, was a quiet sentinel, waiting for a breakthrough. It became the cornerstone of a belief that, even after 20 years, answers could still arrive. In a world where memories fade and stories are forgotten, the Turner case remained alive, a constant reminder that some mysteries endure not because they are unsolvable, but because the truth waits patiently for the right moment to emerge. In 2025, the investigation into Emily Turner A.'s disappearance took a turn that no one had dared hope for in 20 years. A new nationwide DNA database had been introduced, connecting genetic material across jurisdictions in ways that were impossible in 2005. Detective Laura Simmons, a specialist in cold cases, had been quietly uploading old evidence from unsolved files. When Emily's DNA sample from the backpack was entered into the system, the response came almost immediately. There was a match. The name that appeared on the screen startled everyone in the department. It belonged to a man with a long record of minor offenses, petty theft, trespassing, and a series of suspicious behaviors, but nothing violent. No one could have predicted that someone so seemingly ordinary could be linked to a case as chilling as Emily I.'s disappearance. The revelation sent shockwaves through the small town. Detectives were cautious but determined. They reopened every file, revisited every statement, and re-examined old photographs and evidence with modern techniques. Surveillance footage from 2005, long dismissed as grainy and inconclusive, was enhanced with technology that barely existed 2 decades prior. Subtle details that had gone unnoticed, like a figure lingering near Emily's usual walking route, suddenly took on new significance. Witnesses who had once been interviewed were contacted again, and even memories long buried were coaxed back into focus. The suspect, now in his 40s, had seemingly settled into a quiet, unassuming life. Friends and neighbors described him as ordinary, even mundane. This incongruity only deepened the mystery. How could someone who blended so seamlessly into everyday life commit such a sinister act? Detectives began piecing together a timeline of his movements in 2005, noting patterns that had previously been invisible. He had lived just a few blocks from Emily, and his routine placed him near the areas she was known to frequent. Details that had seemed coincidental now formed a disturbing pattern of opportunity and access. Evidence from the past began to align with this new revelation. Small inconsistencies in witness accounts, previously dismissed as memory lapses, now gained clarity. Items found near Emily's home, including discarded wrappers and a forgotten backpack, were re-examined. Forensic analysis revealed minute traces of material linking the suspect to these objects. Every clue, every fragment, every overlooked detail began to converge into a picture of a crime that had remained invisible only because the technology to reveal it had not yet existed. The breakthrough was both thrilling and terrifying. After 20 years of uncertainty, the case was alive again. Detectives could almost feel Emily's presence in their work, urging them forward. For her family, the news was a fragile mix of hope and dread. The idea that the person responsible had been identified was both comforting and frightening, as the reality of what had happened came closer into focus. The cold, long-dormant case was no longer just a memory. It was a puzzle beginning to take shape, a truth that demanded to be uncovered. The investigation had crossed a threshold, moving from speculation to certainty, from the unknown to the brink of revelation. As investigators delved deeper into the suspect's past, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Though he had no record of violent crimes, his behavior in the neighborhood around the time of Emily's disappearance was troubling. Neighbors recalled seeing him loitering near the streets she frequented, often at odd hours, watching quietly from a distance. Small details that once seemed harmless, an unclaimed package left near a sidewalk, a door left ajar, a car parked too long, now hinted at calculated observation. Every piece of the puzzle, previously overlooked or dismissed, now demanded careful attention. Detectives retraced the suspect's movements in 2005, reconstructing a timeline of his activities with painstaking precision. Surveillance footage from nearby convenience stores and gas stations, grainy at the time, was now clearer thanks to enhanced technology. Analysts identified him in multiple locations on the day Emily vanished, sometimes near her usual walking route, sometimes in places that seemed unrelated. It became apparent that he had been studying her routines, understanding her habits, and waiting for the perfect opportunity. The realization sent a shiver through the team. A seemingly ordinary man had methodically prepared for a crime that went unnoticed for 2 decades. Meanwhile, officers re-interviewed witnesses from the original investigation. Some recollections, once dismissed as vague, now fit into the emerging timeline. A jogger remembered a man standing too close to the sidewalk, pretending to tie his shoes but watching intently. A delivery driver recalled a car parked at an unusual angle near Emily's street. These small observations, scattered across memory, now formed a coherent map of the suspect's movements. Every tiny fragment of the past became critical evidence, illustrating how a life could be stolen in plain sight and left unresolved for years. Physical evidence also played a key role. Items stored in the evidence room for decades, including Emily's backpack and personal belongings, underwent modern forensic analysis. Traces of fibers, fingerprints, and biological material linked the suspect to these objects. A careful reconstruction of the crime scene, combining forensic data with witness accounts, revealed the horrifying sequence of events. Emily had been abducted swiftly, concealed in a location nearby, and kept hidden long enough for her disappearance to go unnoticed. The meticulousness of the act, paired with the suspect's ability to blend into the community, explained why the case had remained unsolved for so long. As the investigation progressed, the detectives felt the weight of both history and urgency. They were no longer just examining a cold case. They were confronting a calculated act that had left lasting scars on a family and a community. Each discovery was a step closer to the truth, bringing clarity to years of uncertainty. The town's shadow of fear, a quiet tension that had lingered for decades, began to shift toward resolution. Emily's story, once a mystery hidden in time, was finally being uncovered piece by piece. The detectives now knew not only who had done it, but how it had been carried out. The revelation was grim, yet it was a critical prelude to the moment that would bring the case to its long-awaited conclusion. A confession that would end 20 years of unanswered questions and reveal the darkest secrets hidden in plain sight. The breakthrough in the investigation reached its climax When detectives confronted the suspect, now in his mid-40s, with the overwhelming evidence linking him to Emily Turner's disappearance. He had lived a quiet, seemingly ordinary life for years, but the shadow of his past had finally caught up with him. Under the intense scrutiny of modern forensic proof and witness reconstructions, he requested a private meeting with the detectives. The meeting was scheduled for midnight, a time chosen not for drama but for the quiet and secrecy it demanded. The atmosphere was tense. Officers knew that 20 years of evasion had brought them to this single, pivotal moment. In the dimly lit interrogation room, the suspect remained calm at first, his demeanor almost indifferent, as if he had rehearsed this moment many times in his own mind. But as the detectives laid out the evidence, the DNA match, the surveillance footage, the reconstructed timeline, the weight of inevitability began to press upon him. Slowly he confessed. He recounted his actions with a cold, detached precision, revealing the location where Emily had been hidden and ultimately left. Every detail, from the initial abduction to the concealment of her remains, matched what investigators had painstakingly pieced together over months of renewed effort. The confession was both horrifying and cathartic. It explained everything that had been inexplicable for 20 years, the absence of signs of struggle, the way the neighborhood had been deceived, and why Emily's disappearance had remained a mystery. For detectives, it was validation of every painstaking step they had taken, every interview, every forensic test, every long night of reviewing old files. For Emily's family, it was a moment of inconceivable mixture. Grief returned with full force, but there was also the relief of knowing the truth and the possibility of closure at last. With the suspect's cooperation, officers recovered Emily's remains from a hidden location, long overlooked and shielded by the passage of time. The discovery brought the case full circle. Though her life had been tragically cut short, the physical evidence finally provided the family with a place to mourn and remember her. Memorials were held quietly, acknowledging both her absence and the resolution of a mystery that had haunted the town for 2 decades. The community, once shadowed by fear and uncertainty, felt a shift. People who had lived with lingering questions could now grasp the stark reality of the events and begin the slow process of healing. The confession, made in the stillness of midnight, became the defining moment of the case. It was proof that even after 20 years, the truth could not remain hidden forever. It highlighted the persistence of law enforcement, the patience of investigators, and the resilience of a family who refused to give up hope. Emily Turner's story, once a painful enigma, finally found its conclusion. The town could breathe again, knowing the person responsible had been held accountable, and that even the coldest cases could ultimately be solved. In the end, the midnight confession was more than an admission of guilt. It was the moment when darkness gave way to light, and decades of unanswered questions were replaced by the certainty of truth. In the dimly lit interrogation room, the suspect remained calm at first, his demeanor almost indifferent, as if he had rehearsed this moment many times in his own mind. But as the detectives laid out the evidence, the DNA match, the surveillance footage, the reconstructed timeline, the weight of inevitability began to press upon him. Slowly he confessed. He recounted his actions with a cold, detached precision, revealing the location where Emily had been hidden and ultimately left. Every detail, from the initial abduction to the concealment of her remains, matched what investigators had painstakingly pieced together over months of renewed effort. The confession was both horrifying and cathartic. It explained everything that had been inexplicable for 20 years, the absence of signs of struggle, the way the neighborhood had been deceived, and why Emily's disappearance had remained a mystery. For detectives, it was validation of every painstaking step they had taken, every interview, every forensic test, every long night of reviewing old files. For Emily's family, it was a moment of inconceivable mixture. Grief returned with full force, but there was also the relief of knowing the truth and the possibility of closure at last. With the suspect's cooperation, officers recovered Emily's remains from a hidden location, long overlooked and shielded by the passage of time. The discovery brought the case full circle. Though her life had been tragically cut short, the physical evidence finally provided the family with a place to mourn and remember her. Memorials were held quietly, acknowledging both her absence and the resolution of a mystery that had haunted the town for 2 decades. The community, once shadowed by fear and uncertainty, felt a shift. People who had lived with lingering questions could now grasp the stark reality of the events and begin the slow process of healing. The confession, made in the stillness of midnight, became the defining moment of the case. It was proof that even after 20 years, the truth could not remain hidden forever. It highlighted the persistence of law enforcement, the patience of investigators, and the resilience of a family who refused to give up hope. Emily Turner's story, once a painful enigma, finally found its conclusion. The town could breathe again, knowing the person responsible had been held accountable, and that even the coldest cases could ultimately be solved. In the end, the midnight confession was more than an admission of guilt. It was the moment when darkness gave way to light, and decades of unanswered questions were replaced by the certainty of truth.